Good evening, dear listeners, and welcome back to Snug as a Bug. Tonight, we're stepping into a world of magic, myth, and legend, the enchanting realms of Celtic folklore. As you settle in, let yourself sink deeply into your bed, releasing the weight of the day with a soothing breath in and out. Feel yourself surrounded by comfort, safe and ready to journey into ancient tales brimming with wonder and mystery. Our first story, The Fairy Queen's Blessing, transports us to a hidden glen deep in the Celtic woods, where a young traveller follows a mysterious song to a shimmering pool. Here, they encounter the radiant Fairy Queen, who bestows a charm of wisdom and protection. Forever changed, the traveller departs, carrying her blessing into the world. In The Changeling Child, a mother suspects her child has been swapped by the Fae and ventures to the forest's edge under the moon's glow. With offerings and a heart full of courage, she dares to summon the fairy folk. Only a selfless act of love can break the spell and bring her true child home at dawn. Let these timeless stories lull you into a state of peace, as the whispers of ancient Celtic lands guide you into a deep, restful sleep. But before we begin, gently close your eyes and allow your body to sink even deeper into your bed, feeling completely supported and cradled in softness. Let your breath flow naturally as you take a long, deep inhale, and then exhale, releasing any lingering tension. With each breath, feel yourself becoming lighter, your thoughts softening, and your heart becoming calm and still. Imagine now that you stand at the edge of a lush, green valley bathed in the silver glow of a full moon. The air is cool and fragrant, carrying the earthy scent of moss and ancient trees, and the faintest hint of wildflowers blooming in secret glens. As you take a step forward, feel the softness of the moss beneath your feet, welcoming you into this enchanted land. A gentle mist rises, swirling around you, glistening like stardust in the moonlight. Each step you take brings you deeper into the heart of this magical world, a place woven with the stories of the Fae, whispered through generations. You hear the faint rustling of leaves, as though the trees are speaking to one another in a language only they understand. The gentle hum of distant waters beckons you forward, the sound mingling with a soft, melodic tune carried on the breeze. It's the music of the forest, an ancient song that has filled these lands for centuries, unseen but always present. As you walk, you come across a hidden glen, illuminated by clusters of glowing mushrooms that form a perfect ring. The grass here shimmers under the moonlight, and a sense of peace settles over you, as though this place is alive, watching you with quiet curiosity. Feel the gentle pull of magic all around you, inviting you to sit by the edge of the fairy ring. The stories you're about to hear belong to this land, tales of courage, of love, of trials overcome, and treasures found in the most unexpected places. With a soft sigh, you close your eyes, letting yourself be carried by the rhythm of the forest, sinking into this moment of perfect stillness. Feel the cool, dewy grass beneath you, the gentle breeze that brushes your face, and the distant, melodic laughter of the Fae echoing through the glen. Now you're ready to begin. Let go, allowing these stories to carry you into the heart of Celtic enchantment, where the veil between worlds is thin and where magic and wonder await in every shadowed glade and moonlit grove. The Fairy Queen's Blessing. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Glen. The cool, misty morning stretched across the hills, cloaking Maeve's small Irish village in a soft veil of silence. The dew clung to the wildflowers outside her home, a modest stone cottage nestled on the edge of the village where lush, green hills met the dense forest. Inside the cottage, Maeve worked alongside her mother, Eibhlin, shaping dough for bread. Eibhlin's hands were worn, her fingers calloused from years of baking and washing, but her touch was gentle, patient, as she kneaded the dough with skillful precision. Maeve mimicked her mother's movements, trying to apply the same gentle pressure, but her mind was elsewhere, lost in thoughts of the forbidden glen. Eibhlin noticed her daughter's distant gaze and stopped kneading, folding her hands over Maeve's. "Maeve, are you hearing me?" Maeve blinked, bringing her focus back to her mother's face. "Yes, Mum. Sorry." "Your head's full of dreams again, isn't it?" Eibhlin said with a sigh. "You need to learn to keep your feet planted on the ground, child." Maeve's lips quirked into a small, playful smile. "What's wrong with dreams?" Eibhlin gave her a look, one that was gentle but laced with worry. "Dreams are fine, Maeve, but that glen—" Her voice softened, and a shadow crossed her face. "It's not meant for us. The Fae are real, Maeve, and they're not like us. They're wild, unbound." Maeve's curiosity simmered, but she nodded in respect to her mother. She'd heard the stories, of course, the old tales woven through village firesides, passed from elder to child. The glen was a place of ancient magic, a place where the boundary between the human world and the world of the Fae was said to blur. "Why are they feared so much, Mum?" Maeve asked, her voice a mere whisper. Eibhlin's eyes grew distant, her hands still over the dough as though holding a memory. "Because the Fae don't see the world as we do. They see things differently, and they don't bind themselves to our rules or understandings. They are older than we are, and what they do, well, it may seem strange, even dangerous to us." Maeve nodded thoughtfully, but her heart pulsed with the allure of the unknown. The tales of the glen fascinated her, and she couldn't resist the urge to explore it, even if it meant defying her mother's wishes. The day passed slowly. Maeve couldn't shake the thrill that stirred within her. She worked in silence, listening to the rhythm of her mother's movements, her own thoughts racing with the mysteries of the glen. By the time the sun had begun its descent, casting an amber glow over the hills, she had made up her mind. She would go that night under the cover of darkness, when the world was quiet and her mother slept. Chapter 2. The Journey Begins. As night fell, Maeve lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening to the creaks and groans of the cottage as it settled into slumber. She waited until her mother's breathing grew slow and steady before slipping out from under her blanket, careful not to make a sound. The air outside was cool, crisp, and laced with the earthy scent of moss and pine. Her bare feet touched the damp earth, and the chill bit through her toes, but Maeve pressed forward, the thrill of adventure warming her from within. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow over the fields and casting faint shadows that danced along her path. Each step into the woods felt like stepping into another world. The sounds of the village faded, replaced by the whispers of leaves, the soft rush of the stream, and the occasional rustle of a creature in the underbrush. She walked with bated breath, senses heightened, feeling the weight of each step as though the forest itself were watching her. Suddenly a fox darted out onto the path before her. It stopped, regarding her with sharp, amber eyes, its tail flicking with curiosity. Maeve froze, her heart pounding. She held her breath, waiting for it to run, but the fox stood its ground, its eyes locked on hers. "Hello, little one," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Are you here to guide me?" The fox tilted its head as though considering her words. Then, with a flick of its tail, it turned and darted down the path, disappearing into the shadows. Maeve continued, feeling the air around her grow thicker, charged with an energy she could almost taste. She was close, closer than she had ever been to the glen. The moonlight grew dim, swallowed by the dense canopy above, and Maeve was left in near darkness, her path illuminated only by the occasional shimmer of starlight filtering through the branches. When she finally stepped into the glen, the world seemed to hold its breath. The trees were taller here, ancient and wise, their branches stretching out like arms to welcome her. Flowers she'd never seen before blossomed under the moon's watchful gaze, their petals glistening as though dusted with silver. A sense of awe washed over her, and for a moment she felt like an intruder in a sacred place. "You are brave, young one, to step into the glen." Maeve spun around, her heart leaping to her throat. Standing by an ancient oak tree was a figure unlike any she had ever seen. A woman, ethereal and fair, her hair flowing like liquid gold, her eyes holding the light of countless stars. Maeve knew instantly who she was. "Are you the Fairy Queen?" she asked, her voice trembling. The woman inclined her head, a slight smile gracing her lips. "Some call me that, yes." Maeve's eyes widened in awe. She had heard tales of the Fairy Queen, tales of her beauty, her wisdom, and her powers, but standing before her was like being in the presence of a living dream. Chapter 3: The Gift of Sight. Maeve stared, her heart pounding as the Fairy Queen's gaze met hers. There was something captivating, almost hypnotic, in those eyes. They held the depth of ancient knowledge, the mysteries of the forest, and a beauty that defied description. "What is it that you seek, Maeve?" The Queen's voice was soft, but it seemed to echo, wrapping around Maeve like a warm breeze. "Why have you come to my glen?" Maeve hesitated, the words tumbling over one another in her mind. How could she explain the longing she felt, the pull of something she couldn't quite name? I don't know exactly," she began, her voice quiet. "I've heard the stories. Everyone speaks of you, of the magic in this place. I wanted to know if they were true." The Fairy Queen's smile was gentle, her eyes softening. "Curiosity, then? A powerful force indeed." Maeve nodded, feeling her cheeks flush. "Yes, curiosity. And something more. I felt called somehow, like I've always been meant to come here." The Queen's expression turned contemplative as she studied Maeve. "You have an open heart, Maeve, and an honest one. Those who are drawn here often carry a spark of magic within them, a gift that lies dormant." Maeve's eyes widened. "A gift? In me?" "Yes," the Queen said, tilting her head as though weighing her words carefully. "It is not a power to be taken lightly. It comes with both joy and sorrow, for you will see the world in ways others cannot. The choice, Maeve, is yours. Shall I grant you the gift of sight?" Maeve's heart raced. She could feel a deep thrill coursing through her veins, the allure of a world beyond her imagination. Yet there was a shadow in the Queen's gaze, a hint of something that warned her to tread carefully. But her curiosity, her yearning, overpowered her caution. "Yes," she whispered. her voice barely more than a breath. "Please, I accept." The queen nodded solemnly and raised her hand, which glowed faintly in the moonlight. She placed her palm gently on Maeve's forehead, and a warm sensation spread through Maeve's body, filling her with light, as though her very soul was being illuminated from within. "Now, Maeve," the queen said softly, "open your eyes." Maeve blinked, and the world around her transformed. Colours she had never seen before shimmered in the glen, like the vibrant hues of a rainbow woven through the trees and flowers. She could see tiny lights flitting through the air, fairies, she realized with awe, their delicate wings trailing stardust. The trees seemed alive, their branches swaying in rhythm to an unheard melody, their leaves whispering secrets to the night. What is this?" Maeve whispered, her voice filled with wonder. It's beautiful." The queen smiled, her gaze distant. "It is the world as we see it. You now hold the gift of sight, but remember, Maeve, it is both a blessing and a burden." Maeve looked at her, her brows knitting in confusion. "A burden?" The queen's eyes grew somber. "There is a price to pay for seeing as we do. You will forever be set apart, different from those around you. You may feel joy in this vision, but it can also bring sorrow, for not all things are as they appear." Maeve's heart sank, the weight of the queen's words settling over her. But as she looked around, her soul swelling with the beauty that surrounded her, she knew that no cost was too great for this gift. Chapter 4. A Heavy Choice. In the days that followed, Maeve roamed her village with the sight still burning brightly within her. The world had become a tapestry of beauty and mystery, each leaf, each stone, each blade of grass brimming with life and energy. At night, she would venture to the edge of the glen just to feel the pulse of its magic calling to her. But with the gift came whispers, echoes of voices from the past, fragments of old memories woven into the landscape. She began to notice things that others could not. Shadows moving out of the corner of her eye, soft melodies drifting on the wind, sounds of laughter when no one was around. Her mother was the first to notice the change in her. One evening, as Maeve was sitting by the fire, gazing into the flames as though lost in another world, Eibhlin placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Maeve, child, you seem different," her mother said softly. "Ever since you wandered into those woods." Maeve turned to her mother, the warmth of the fire casting shadows across her face. "I'm fine, Mum," she assured her, though even as she spoke, she knew her words sounded hollow. Eibhlin studied her daughter, a mixture of love and worry in her gaze. "You know that some things are not meant for us, Maeve. The Fae world, it's beautiful, yes, but it's also dangerous. They have their own rules, their own ways." Maeve's heart ached. She wanted to tell her mother everything, to share the wonder, the beauty she had seen. But she knew her mother would never understand. The gift of sight was a blessing, but it was also a secret she had to bear alone. "I understand, Mum," Maeve whispered, lowering her gaze, but deep down she knew that she was forever changed. She had touched something otherworldly, something that bound her to the glen in ways she couldn't fully explain. Chapter 5. Farewell to the Glen. Days turned to weeks, and the village soon noticed the change in Maeve. She had become quieter, more withdrawn, spending her evenings wandering the forest edges, her gaze distant and lost. The villagers whispered among themselves, casting wary glances her way. They sensed the shift in her, though they couldn't understand it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maeve found herself once again at the edge of the glen, standing in the place where the boundary between worlds was thin. She could feel the pull of the Fairy Queen's magic, the soft hum that seemed to vibrate through the air. "Maeve." The voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it resonated through her. Maeve looked up to see the Fairy Queen standing before her, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. "You have come," the Queen said, her gaze warm and knowing. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Maeve nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes, but it's changed me. I feel as though I no longer belong here. I see things, hear things that others cannot. I feel so alone." The Queen's expression softened, her hand reaching out to gently cup Maeve's cheek. "It is the way of things, child. The gift of sight sets you apart, but it also binds you to this land, to the magic of the Fae." Maeve felt a deep ache in her chest, a longing to return to the world of simplicity, to the life she had known before. Can I stay here with you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "In the glen?" The Fairy Queen looked at her with a mixture of sadness and pride. "The choice is yours, Maeve. You may stay, but know that it would mean leaving your mortal life behind. To live in the glen is to become one with the Fae, to belong fully to our world." Maeve hesitated, the weight of the choice pressing down upon her. She loved her mother, her village, the quiet life she had once known. Yet the call of the glen, the magic of the Fae, was an irresistible pull that resonated deep within her soul. After a long moment, she took a deep breath, her decision solidifying in her heart. She looked up at the Fairy Queen, her eyes filled with both sorrow and resolve. "I cannot leave my mother," she whispered, "but I will carry this gift within me, and I will return to the glen when the time is right." The Queen nodded, her gaze filled with understanding. "Then take this memory, Maeve. Carry it with you always, and know that you are forever welcome in the glen." The Queen raised her hand, and a soft glow enveloped Maeve, filling her with warmth and peace. She felt the magic settle within her, a quiet hum that would forever be a part of her soul. As the glow faded, Maeve looked up to find herself standing alone at the edge of the glen, the trees swaying gently in the evening breeze. The Fairy Queen was gone, but Maeve could feel her presence, a comforting warmth in her heart. With a final lingering glance at the glen, Maeve turned and walked back to her village, her heart both heavy and full. She would carry the magic of the glen with her always, a quiet flame that would guide her through the mortal world. But deep down, she knew that one day, when the time was right, she would return. The Changeling Child. Chapter 1. A Silent Night. The village was shrouded in mist, the kind that settled so thick it seemed to veil the world in secrecy. The air was cool and heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint, sweet aroma of elderflowers that grew by the edge of the forest. In one small, solitary cottage, nestled at the outskirts of the village, a woman named Bridget sat by the fire, her gaze fixed on the crib beside her. Her child, little Ian, had been unwell for days now. Feverish and restless, he had cried inconsolably through the nights, his tiny body racked with a mysterious ailment. Bridget's heart ached as she watched over him, her fingers absently tracing the smooth wooden crib her husband had carved before he'd passed. Ian had always been a lively child, his laughter a melody that filled her world with light, but now his bright eyes were dim, his spirit waning. She reached out to brush a damp curl from his forehead, murmuring softly, "Rest, my love, the dawn will bring you strength." The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows that danced along the walls. Outside, a mournful breeze swept through the trees, its whispers sounding almost like voices. It was then that Bridget noticed the stillness. The usual night sounds, the hoot of the owl, the chirp of crickets, had vanished, leaving only silence in their wake. She shivered, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Suddenly a soft knock echoed at the door. Bridget's heart leapt, her eyes darting to the darkened windows. Who would come at such an hour? Rising slowly, she moved to the door, her steps careful and hesitant. She opened it a crack, peering out into the night, only to find no one there. The mist swirled at her feet, thick and ghostly, seeming to pulse with an energy that sent a chill down her spine. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice barely carrying into the darkness. But there was no answer, only the whisper of the wind carrying a soft, haunting melody. She closed the door, heart pounding, trying to shake off the unease. Returning to the crib, she was startled to find Ian lying peacefully, his breathing even and calm. His fever had broken. Bridget felt a surge of relief, sinking to her knees beside him, tears of gratitude filling her eyes. Yet, as she watched him sleep, a strange sensation began to creep over her, a faint but unshakable feeling that something was different. Chapter 2. The other Ian. Days passed, and though Ian seemed recovered, Bridget couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. There were small things, subtle but unsettling. The way he looked at her now, his gaze piercing and unblinking, his once familiar laughter now carrying an odd, hollow ring. His voice, though still soft, seemed somehow foreign, as though it were layered with an echo she couldn't quite place. One evening, as she sat by the fire with him, she noticed that he no longer hummed the little tune she'd sung to him every night. She began to hum it softly, hoping he would join in, but he only stared at her, his eyes dark and unfathomable. "Ian, love," she whispered, her heart heavy with worry. "Do you remember our song?" The child tilted his head, his mouth curving into a faint, unsettling smile. "Sing it for me, Mama," he murmured, his voice soft but devoid of warmth. Bridget felt a shiver run down her spine. She did as he asked, her voice trembling as she sang the familiar tune. But as she finished, he simply watched her, his eyes holding none of the recognition or joy she'd always seen in them before. In the following days, the strange behaviors continued. Ian, once playful and filled with laughter, became solemn, watching her with an unnerving stillness. He no longer played with his favorite toys, instead spending hours staring out the window, his expression one of detached curiosity. Even his movements seemed different, almost too graceful for a child his age. One night, as she lay awake, the horrible suspicion took root in her heart. The stories she'd heard in her youth, stories of changelings left in place of human children, haunted her thoughts. Could it be true? Could the child sleeping in the crib beside her be someone else? Chapter 3. Seeking the Truth. Desperate for answers, Brigid sought out the village healer, a wise woman named Sorcha, who was known for her knowledge of both herbal remedies and the old lore. She found Sorcha in her small cottage, surrounded by dried herbs and bundles of charms. Sorcha looked at Brigid with kind, knowing eyes as she listened to her tale. "Tell me everything, lass," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Leave nothing out." Brigid recounted the strange night, the fever, the knock on the door, the eerie silence that had fallen over the village. Sorcha listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. When Brigid had finished, Sorcha reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "It is as I feared," she said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "The child in your home, he may not be Ian." Brigid's breath caught, her chest tightening. "But how? How could this happen?" "The Fae are known to take children, especially those with bright spirits, and leave changelings in their place," Sorcha explained, her tone grave. "They are drawn to the energy of human children, to their innocence and light. And once a changeling is placed, it is no easy task to retrieve the child taken." Brigid felt tears prickle her eyes. "Is there no way to get him back?" Sorcha's expression softened, her hand resting on Brigid's shoulder. "There is a way, but it is dangerous. You would need to confront the Fae themselves, to travel to their realm and bargain with them. Few have done it and returned." Brigid swallowed, her heart pounding. The thought of facing the Fae, of journeying into their world, filled her with dread. But the thought of losing Ian forever was even more terrifying. "Tell me what I must do," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. Sorcha nodded, leading her to a small cabinet filled with strange and ancient items. She handed Brigid a small vial of water, its liquid glimmering faintly in the dim light. "This is water from the sacred well," Sorcha explained. "Sprinkle it around Ian's crib tonight. If he is truly a changeling, he will be revealed." Brigid took the vial, her fingers curling around it tightly. "And if he is?" Sorcha met her gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of pity and admiration. "Then you must decide, Brigid. To accept him as he is, or to face the Fae and demand your son's return." Brigid left Sorcha's cottage with a heart heavy with fear and hope. That night, as she prepared for bed, she took the vial of sacred water and carefully sprinkled it around Ian's crib, her hands shaking as she whispered a quiet prayer. Chapter 4. The Revelation. The night was dark and still, the silence so profound it pressed against Brigid's ears. She lay awake, listening to the soft breathing of the child beside her, her heart pounding as she waited for a sign. As midnight approached, a chill settled over the room. The fire flickered, its light dimming as though something unseen was drawing its warmth away. Brigid's breath caught as she saw a faint, silvery glow appear around the crib. She rose slowly, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders, and moved to the crib, her heart hammering in her chest. Ian lay sleeping, his face peaceful. But as she watched, his form began to waver, his features blurring and shifting until the familiar face of her son was replaced by something else. His eyes opened, and Brigid gasped, stumbling back as she met a gaze that was far older, far more ancient than any child's. "Why do you look at me so, Mama?" he murmured, his voice soft and mocking. Brigid's heart twisted with grief and fury. "You are not my son," she whispered, her voice trembling with both sorrow and rage. "Where is he? Where is my Ian?" The changeling tilted his head, a faint smile playing at his lips. "The Fae do not give without taking. nor take without leaving something in return. Your child is elsewhere, but he is well cared for." Brigid's hands clenched into fists. "I demand his return. You have no right—" "Rights?" the changeling interrupted, his voice a mixture of laughter and derision. "Your world and ours do not share the same rules, human." Brigid took a deep, steadying breath, her voice growing firm. "Then I will go to your world. I will speak to your queen and demand my son back." The changeling's eyes gleamed with a mixture of amusement and surprise. "Few are brave enough to face the Queen of the Fae, but if you wish to try, human, then go. The path will find you, should you choose to walk it." With that, he closed his eyes, his form shifting once more to resemble the innocent face of her son. Brigid felt a surge of determination rise within her, her fear replaced by a fierce, unbreakable resolve. Chapter 5. Into the Realm of the Fae. Brigid prepared herself for the journey, gathering only the essentials. A loaf of bread, a vial of sacred water, and a small pendant of her husband's that she wore for strength. She whispered a quiet prayer for guidance, her hands steady as she gathered her courage. As dawn broke, she set off toward the forest, her heart pounding as she stepped beyond the familiar paths and into the depths of the woods. She followed no path, guided only by instinct and the quiet hum that seemed to beckon her forward. The forest grew darker, the trees towering above her like silent guardians as the air thickened with magic. Finally, she reached a clearing bathed in a soft, ethereal light. In the center stood a ring of mushrooms, their caps glowing faintly. She knew from the tales that this was the entrance, the threshold to the realm of the Fae. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the circle, feeling a strange, tingling sensation wash over her. The world shifted, colors blurring and twisting, the air filled with a strange, melodic hum. When the dizziness subsided, she found herself standing in a land unlike any she'd ever seen, a place of surreal beauty and danger. In the distance, a grand palace rose, its walls shimmering like moonlight on water. The path was clear, beckoning her forward, but Brigid hesitated, feeling the weight of the journey ahead. With a final, determined breath, she took her first step, her heart set on one thing only, reclaiming her son, whatever the cost. Chapter 6. The Palace of the Fae. Brigid's steps were careful as she moved along the winding path toward the palace, her eyes darting to the shadows, where strange creatures watched her with gleaming eyes. The land around her was surreal, the sky a blend of twilight hues, casting everything in a silvery glow. Flowers in colors she'd never seen before dotted the path, their petals whispering softly as she passed. Ahead, the palace loomed, its towers spiraling gracefully into the sky, its walls seeming to shift and breathe, as if woven from moonlight itself. Brigid clutched her pendant tightly, drawing strength from its familiar warmth as she approached the grand entrance, where two tall figures stood guard. Their eyes were piercing, their expressions unreadable, and they regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. One of them stepped forward, his voice as smooth as silk. "What brings a mortal to the Palace of the Fae?" Brigid straightened, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "I am here to see the Fairy Queen. I have come for my child." The guards exchanged a glance, a flicker of amusement passing between them. "The Queen does not meet with mortals lightly," the other replied, his tone almost mocking. "But if she has allowed you passage into our realm, then perhaps you are meant to speak with her." With a wave of his hand, the grand doors opened, and Brigid was led inside. The palace was as enchanting as it was unsettling, filled with music that seemed to resonate from the very walls. Fae of every shape and size moved gracefully through the halls, their laughter ringing like chimes in the air. But there was an undercurrent to the beauty, a sense of danger lurking beneath the glamour. Finally, Brigid was brought to a grand hall, its ceiling soaring above her, where the fairy queen sat upon a throne of woven silver and flowers that shimmered like stardust. Her beauty was blinding, her presence commanding. Brigid felt the weight of the queen's gaze upon her, and though every instinct told her to look away, she held her ground, her heart filled with resolve. "You have come far, mortal," the queen said, her voice like a melody both sweet and cold. "Few have the courage to seek me out. Tell me, what is it you desire?" Brigid took a deep breath, her voice strong. "I have come for my son. The Fae took him, leaving a changeling in his place. I demand his return." The queen's eyes narrowed, her lips curving into a faint smile. "You demand?" she repeated, her tone laced with amusement. "You walk into my realm and make demands of me?" Brigid swallowed, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. "I do, because he is mine. He belongs to me, not to your world." The queen studied her for a long moment, her gaze piercing. "You speak boldly, mortal, but what you ask is no small thing. The Fae do not take without reason, and they do not return what they have claimed easily." Brigid's heart ached, but she met the queen's gaze without flinching. "I would give anything to have him back, whatever it takes." The queen's eyes sparkled with interest. "Anything, you say? A bold promise. But would you truly give up all you hold dear to retrieve him? Your own spirit, perhaps?" Brigid hesitated, feeling the gravity of the queen's words. But as she thought of her son, his laughter, his warmth, she knew her answer was unwavering. "Yes," she said firmly. "My life, my spirit, my very soul. I would give it all for him." The queen smiled, a glimmer of approval in her gaze. "Very well. You may see him, but the price must still be paid." With a wave of her hand, the air shimmered and a small figure appeared at the edge of the hall. Brigid's heart leapt as she recognized her son, his bright eyes filled with wonder as he looked around, unaware of the world he had been taken to. "Ian!" she cried, her voice breaking as she ran to him, scooping him into her arms. He blinked up at her, a flicker of recognition in his gaze, and reached out, touching her face with a tiny, trembling hand. "Amma!" Tears streamed down her cheeks as she held him close, her heart swelling with relief and joy. But as she looked up, she saw the queen watching her with an expectant gaze. "You may take him," the queen said, her voice gentle yet firm. "But in return, you shall remain here, a part of my court, for all eternity." Brigid's heart pounded, her grip tightening around Ian. She had known there would be a price, but the finality of it struck her with a force that left her breathless. Is there no other way?" she whispered, her voice filled with desperation. The queen's gaze softened, a hint of pity in her eyes. "You have chosen, mortal, but I am not without mercy." She paused, as though considering. "I will allow you to bid farewell. One last memory to leave with your child." Brigid's heart ached as she looked at Ian, his innocent eyes filled with love and trust. She cupped his face in her hands, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Remember me, my love. Carry my memory with you, wherever you go, and know that I will always be with you in spirit."
Ian clung to her, his small hands gripping her tightly. "Mama, don't leave!" Bridget's heart shattered, but she forced a smile, kissing his forehead softly. "I will never truly leave you, Ian. You will carry my love with you always." The Queen lifted her hand, and in an instant, Ian vanished, returned to the mortal world, safe in his crib, his memories of the realm fading like a distant dream. Chapter 7. The Price of a Mother's Love.
Bridget stood alone in the grand hall, her heart heavy with the loss of her son, but filled with a strange peace. She had saved him, had given him a life free from the enchantments of the Fae. It was all she had ever wanted. The Queen rose from her throne, descending the steps to stand before Bridget. "You have given much, mortal. Few would have the courage to pay such a price." Bridget lifted her head, meeting the Queen's gaze. "He is my son. There is nothing I would not give for him."
The Queen regarded her with a faint smile, her expression unreadable. "Then you shall have a place in my court, but know this. You are free from the mortal world now. Your spirit will dwell here, forever bound to my realm." Bridget nodded, feeling both sorrow and acceptance wash over her. She had known the cost, had embraced it fully, and now she was ready to face whatever lay ahead.
The Queen turned, gesturing for Bridget to follow. "Come, child, there is much to learn, and time here stretches endlessly." As Bridget followed the Queen through the winding halls, she felt the weight of her choice settle over her. She was no longer bound to the world she had known, but in her heart she knew she had done what was right. Her spirit, though now a part of the Fae realm, would forever be tied to Ian, watching over him, guiding him from afar. And as the years passed in the timeless land of the Fae, Bridget became a legend among them, a mortal who had loved so fiercely, so unconditionally, that she had given up everything for the sake of her child. The Fae whispered her story, admiring her courage, even as they marveled at the mystery of human love.